The sanctuary stilled when my mother gasped at the program in her lap. Years had passed. I had become someone they never expected. Guest speaker, Dr. Vivian Lane, me, the daughter they never acknowledged. Her fingers went white around the edges of the paper. My father's eyes jumped from the printed name to where I stood in the aisle. I was dressed in the navy suit they'd never seen me wear, carrying the composure for years had taught me. Sylvia, he breathed, as if saying it might make the math add up. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Whispers rippled through the pews like wind through dry leaves. I moved forward, my heels steady against the polished floor, each click a declaration they'd never heard me make. They assumed I'd vanished because I'd failed. They never imagined I'd vanished because I'd succeeded. And watching them struggle to connect the daughter they'd overlooked with a consultant whose credentials filled half the page, I understood what they were only beginning to grasp. Showing up matters. And they'd stopped showing up long before I stopped being Sylvia. To understand their shock, you need to know how I grew up. I grew up in a house where my parents loved parties more than me. Our California house always smelled like perfume and ambition. Mom swept through rooms, trailing laughter and the click of her heels. Her voice rose above every conversation, like she was perpetually on stage. Dad followed in her wake, quieter but just as hungry for the glow of being noticed, nodding along to her stories, refilling glasses, making sure everyone knew he belonged at the center of things. They lived for Friday nights when the driveway filled with cars and our living room transformed into theater. Rachel thrived in it. At 14, she could work a room like she'd been born doing it, her laugh perfectly timed, her stories landing exactly right. Mother would rest a hand on her shoulder, beaming, and say things like, "This one's got it," to whoever was listening. They'd leave together for gallery openings and benefit dinners, Rachel in a borrowed dress, glowing under the attention our parents poured over her like champagne. I was 16 when Mother found me reading on the porch during one of their parties. She looked at me the way you'd look at furniture placed wrong. "Why aren't you inside, Sylvia?" "Studying," I said, holding up my biology textbook. She sighed, adjusting her earrings. "You just don't bring the spark, sweetheart. It's not your fault." The music swelled behind her as she went back inside. I sat there, the book heavy in my lap, understanding for the first time that I'd been weighed and found wanting in my own home. The pattern started small, easy to excuse. My high school graduation fell on a Saturday in June, the school gym, thick with heat and the faint scent of roses. Mom and Dad arrived on time, found seats in the middle section. I spotted them from my place in the alphabetical rows, felt something loosen in my chest. They came. But the moment my name was called and I accepted my diploma, I looked over to where my parents were seated. The seats were empty. By the time we filed out, I checked the parking lot, and their car wasn't there. I called Mother and she said, "We have the Hendersons thing," with excitement in her voice. "You understand. Congratulations, sweetheart." I hung up and stood in the parking lot in tears, still clutching my diploma, while around me families took pictures and made dinner plans. Rachel texted, "Mom says you did great." I cried so much when I got home. No one asked why my eyes were red. At Berkeley, I poured myself into public health and epidemiology, studying disease patterns and population dynamics, finding comfort in data that didn't play favorites. 4 years of research, late nights in labs, building something that mattered. I sent the graduation invitation months early. Mother replied, "Conflicts with the Pattersons' garden party. You know how these things are. So proud of you." I sat alone in my cap and gown on the campus lawn afterward, watching families cluster around their graduates, taking pictures, making noise, filling space. A woman asked if I wanted her to take my photo. I said no thank you, folding the program into neat squares. "They're just busy people," I told myself. Important people have commitments. I was still learning that busy was a choice, and I'd never been chosen. The PhD program felt like redemption waiting to happen. 5 years studying infectious disease modeling, building algorithms that could predict outbreak patterns, publishing research that public health departments actually used. This was different. This was a doctorate. Surely a doctorate was significant enough to compete with cocktail parties and charity galas. I sent the dissertation defense invitation 6 months in advance. Formal cardstock, date and time printed in elegant script. Called to follow up. Of course we'll be there, Mother said, her voice bright with what I wanted to believe was genuine pride. Our daughter, Dr. Robbins. Can you imagine? I could. I'd been imagining it for 5 years. Dad called 2 weeks before the defense, his voice careful. Listen, something came up with the Martinsons' anniversary thing. But we'll absolutely make the hooding ceremony. That's the big one anyway, right? The formal recognition. I sat on my apartment floor, phone pressed to my ear, nodding even though he couldn't see me.
Right.
The hooding ceremony. That's fine. Rachel texted. You know how they are. At least they're trying. I told myself it was fine. The dissertation defense was academic, technical, just my committee and a few colleagues. The hooding ceremony was public, prestigious. Local health officials would be there, department heads, the dean. It would be covered by the university news. That's what mattered. I rehearsed my presentation alone, defended my research to 5 faculty members who asked sharp questions and nodded approvingly. Afterward, my advisor shook my hand. Brilliant work, Dr. Robbins. Your family must be so proud. They will be, I said. At the hooding. I sent 3 reminders about the ceremony. Added it to the family group chat. Called Mother a week before to confirm. Wouldn't miss it for the world, she promised. Background noise suggested she was already at someone's house, music and voices competing for space. I bought a new dress to wear under my regalia. Pressed it carefully. Laid it out the night before like it was armor. This time would be different. It had to be. The auditorium filled with families, cameras, flowers. I adjusted my doctoral hood, the velvet heavy across my shoulders, and scanned the reserve section. 4 empty seats in a row, name cards still visible. Robbins family. The ceremony began. Local health officials spoke about contributions to the field. My name appeared on the program under Distinguished Achievement Recognition. I kept watching the doors, waiting for the rush of late arrivals, the apologetic shuffle into seats. My phone buzzed in my pocket during the opening remarks. Mother's name lit the screen. Relief flooded through me. They were calling to say they'd arrived, couldn't find parking, where should they sit? I stepped into the corridor and answered. Music crashed through the line first. Laughter. Clinking glasses. Then Mother's voice, bright and bewildered. Sylvia? Where are you? Why aren't you at the party? Everyone's having fun. The hallway tilted. What party? The Thompsons thing. We're all here. Even Rachel brought that boy she's seeing. When are you coming? My regalia suddenly felt like a costume.
Mom.
My hooding ceremony. It's happening right now. Silence. Then, oh, sweetheart. Was that today? Through the door, I heard the dean announcing my name, my research, my achievements. To a room missing everyone who should have cared most. They didn't forget. They chose. I drove home in my regalia, still wearing the hood that no one had witnessed. My apartment was dark and quiet, the opposite of everywhere my family chose to be. I set the diploma on my desk beside the velvet hood, both objects suddenly feeling like artifacts from someone else's life. My laptop sat waiting. I opened it, the screen's glow harsh in the darkness, and typed. Legal name change, California. The petition form loaded. Requirements, fees, court procedures. It all seemed remarkably simple, how completely you could unmake yourself on paper. I filled out the first line. Current legal name, Sylvia Marie Robbins. The name of a daughter who kept waiting in empty rooms. Desired legal name. My cursor blinked in the blank space. Vivian Lane. I typed it slowly, testing how it looked. Strong. Professional. Completely separate from the family that had shaped Sylvia into someone small enough to overlook. Vivian Lane had no history of empty chairs, no muscle memory of swallowing disappointment. Over the next 3 weeks, I became methodical. Courthouse visits during lunch breaks. Forms filled out with steady hands at coffee shops. Notarizations. Filing fees. The judge barely looked up when she stamped the approval, but that small sound, crisp and final, felt like a door closing on everything behind me. I updated my birth certificate first. Then Social Security, driver's license, bank accounts. Each document that said Robbins felt lighter in my hands. Sylvia was disappearing from official records, and I was letting her go. Washington, D.C. greeted me with October rain and the anonymity of a city where no one knew Sylvia Robbins had ever existed. My new apartment overlooked a tree-lined street in DuPont Circle, small but mine, every piece of furniture chosen by someone who didn't have to shrink herself to fit. I created a new email address, updated my CV, Dr. Vivian Lane, PhD in public health and epidemiology. The consulting firm that hired me never asked about my family, never wondered why a freshly minted doctorate was starting over on the East Coast. They cared about my pandemic preparedness models, my infectious disease forecasting, my publications. I had those reprinted under my new name, built a LinkedIn profile from scratch, designed a professional website with Vivian Lane in clean, bold letters across the top. Each update felt like building a foundation no one could shake. My old phone, the one with my family's numbers, started buzzing the second week. Mother's texts, Sylvia, what's happening? Call us. Dad's voicemails, halting and confused. Rachel's messages alternating between concern and accusation. This is childish. We're worried. I blocked each number methodically, changed my personal email, gave my new contact information only to colleagues, friends who'd earned it, the handful of people who'd actually shown up. Their attempts hit dead ends. The university wouldn't forward mail without my consent. My old landlord had no forwarding address. Every digital trail led to Vivian Lane, and Vivian Lane had no family named Robbins in her emergency contacts. For years past like that, I advised hospital systems on outbreak response, consulted for NGOs on vaccination strategies, spoke at conferences where people listened, took notes, asked thoughtful questions. I built a life where showing up was the baseline, not a favor. And Sylvia stayed buried in California, unmissed. By year 3, Dr. Vivian Lane had become someone people sought out. My consulting firm promoted me to senior advisor. I testified before congressional committees about pandemic preparedness gaps. The CDC cited my outbreak modeling in their strategic planning documents. Journal editors knew my work. Conference organizers put my name on keynote lists. Every Tuesday, I met Dr. Henry Blade for coffee at a cafe near the Capitol. We'd discuss epidemiological trends, debate intervention strategies, sometimes just talk about books we'd read. He listened when I spoke, asked follow-up questions, remembered details from conversations weeks prior. Once he said, "You have a way of seeing patterns others miss," and I realized no one in my family had ever observed me closely enough to say something like that. Colleagues invited me to dinner parties where the conversations stayed substantive, asked my opinion on policy proposals, valued my input on grant applications. Small recognitions that accumulated into something I'd never had before, the simple, steady experience of being seen. My DC apartment became a sanctuary. Evenings, I'd curl up on my couch with research journals, herbal tea steaming beside me, rain pattering against the windows. Sometimes I'd look up from an article about disease surveillance and feel something unfamiliar, peace. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of rightness. No one here knew about the empty chairs at my hooding ceremony. No one knew Sylvia had spent her childhood being told she lacked spark. To them, I was simply Dr. Lane, competent, respected, present. This was the life Sylvia had dreamed of during those lonely hours in Berkeley, studying while her family danced at someone else's party. But Sylvia couldn't have built it. She was too busy making herself small, rationalizing neglect, waiting for people to choose her. Vivian didn't wait. Vivian showed up for herself and built a life that reflected that commitment. The email arrived on a Thursday morning in March, subject lines simple and devastating. Carol Robbins Memorial Service. I stared at my screen, coffee going cold in my hand. Aunt Carol, the only person who'd sent a card for my high school graduation with a handwritten note. Proud of your dedication, Sylvia. That matters more than any party. Who'd called after my Berkeley graduation actually called, asking about my research, my plans, whether I was taking care of myself. who'd mailed me a congratulations card for my PhD, even though, I realize now, she must have heard about it secondhand since I'd stopped speaking to the family. The service was in 3 weeks. Palo Alto. A Saturday afternoon. I could ignore it. Stay in DC, where Vivian Lane existed cleanly, untethered from the past. But Carol had shown up for me when it cost her nothing to do so, when showing up wasn't transactional or contingent on my being entertaining enough. I owed her this. The decision made, I began preparing like I was planning a campaign. I bought a navy suit, professional and polished, the kind of outfit that communicated competence without apology. Stood in front of my mirror practicing what I'd say if confronted. I'm here for Carol. Simple. Unarguable. Practice my expression staying neutral when Mother inevitably made it about her hurt feelings. Rehearsed walking away if they demanded explanations I didn't owe them. The drive from DC to California took 4 days. I could have flown, but I needed the time, needed to watch the landscape shift, feel the distance I'd traveled not just in miles but in becoming. Every state line crossed felt like moving through layers of who I'd been. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Nebraska, Utah. By the time I reached Nevada, my hands had stopped shaking on the wheel. Crossing into California felt like entering a museum of my former life. Same golden hills, same dry heat. But I was different now. Sylvia had left from here. Vivian was returning, and she wasn't coming back to stay. The sanctuary doors were heavy oak, requiring both hands to open. Inside, the air smelled of lilies and old wood polish. Afternoon light filtered through stained glass, casting colored shadows across the pews. My family sat in the 3rd row. I recognized them by posture before faces, Mother's rigid spine, Dad's slight forward lean, Rachel's habitual hair tucking. They hadn't seen me yet. I moved to the front where the coordinator waited, checking names against her clipboard. Dr. Lane, she whispered. You're our guest speaker. We'll distribute programs now, then begin in 5 minutes. Programs rustled as ushers handed them out. I watched from my seat in the front row as the paper made its way through the sanctuary. Watched the moment Mother opened hers, scanned down to the speaker section. Guest speaker, Dr. Vivian Lane, public health consultant, Washington, D.C. Her sharp intake of breath carried 3 rows. Dad leaned over, squinting at the program, then his head snapped up, searching. His eyes found me, and I watched the calculation happen. The woman in the navy suit, the name that wasn't Sylvia, the 4 years of silence suddenly making terrible sense. Sylvia, he whispered, but in the quiet sanctuary it might as well have been shouted. Every head turned. Mother's face had gone white. Rachel's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The coordinator nodded to me. I stood, walked to the podium, and spoke about Aunt Carol for 12 minutes. About her consistency, her thoughtfulness, the way she'd shown up not just physically, but emotionally. How she taught me that presence was a choice, and choosing to be present for someone was among the greatest gifts we could offer. I didn't look at my family while I spoke. I looked at the photograph of Carol smiling beside a garden she'd tended for 30 years. A woman who'd understood that what you nurture is what grows. Afterward, they cornered me in the vestibule before I could reach my car. For years, Mother said, her voice shaking. For years, Sylvia. Do you have any idea what we've been through? Rachel stepped forward, and I noticed it then. The limp, the fading scar along her temple. I was in a car accident. Nearly died. Where were you? Dad looked older, grayer. Heart attack scare last year. Had to give up drinking, the parties, all of it. His voice carried accusation like I'd personally caused his health crisis. You abandoned us when we needed you, Mother continued, tears starting. We're your family. The old Sylvia would have apologized, would have absorbed their pain and made it hers. But Vivian had spent 4 years learning a different language. You weren't there for my high school graduation, I said quietly. You left for a party before I got my diploma. That's not. You skipped my college graduation. Berkeley. For years of work, and you chose a garden party. Rachel started to speak. I kept going. You missed my dissertation defense. Promised you'd come to my hooding ceremony instead. Do you remember where you were that day? Silence. You called me, I said, my voice steady as a diagnosis. From the Thompsons' party. Asked why I wasn't there. While I was standing in doctoral regalia being honored by the California Department of Public Health. Mother's tears had stopped. She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. I learned the pattern from you. I continued. You taught me that some people will always choose celebration over showing up. So I chose to build a life with people who understand the difference. We made mistakes, Dad said. But you're our daughter. I was your daughter, I corrected. Sylvia was your daughter. And you never showed up for her. Not when it mattered. I pulled a business card from my pocket, held it out. Dr. Vivian Lane. CDC consultant. My DC contact information. Forgiveness is possible, I said. But on different terms than you're used to. It will take time. It will require you to actually show up. And if you can't do that, I paused, making sure they understood. Then this is goodbye. Rachel took the card with trembling fingers. I walked past them, through the sanctuary doors, into California sunshine that felt nothing like coming home. I drove away from the sanctuary watching them shrink in my rearview mirror, 3 figures standing in the parking lot holding a business card like it was a map to somewhere they'd never been. Mother's hand was on Dad's arm. Rachel stood slightly apart, still staring at the card. They looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I just stopped seeing them as the center of everything. The drive back to DC felt shorter than the journey out, like I was being pulled home rather than running away. I stopped less frequently, drove longer stretches, eager to return to the life I'd built where my presence wasn't negotiable. My apartment welcomed me with familiar silence, not the hollow kind from childhood, but the full kind that comes from choosing solitude over being ignored in company. I unpacked slowly, hanging my navy suit in the closet beside the other professional armor I'd accumulated. Dr. Vivian Lane's wardrobe. A woman who advised governments and testified before Congress and never had to wonder if she mattered. Tuesday morning, Henry met me at our usual cafe. How is California? He asked, sliding my usual order across the table. It was closure, I said simply. He nodded, understanding without needing details. That was the difference. The people in my current life respected boundaries, didn't demand access to pain I wasn't ready to share. Work resumed its steady rhythm. Meetings, consultations, research. My phone stayed silent, no block numbers trying to break through, no desperate voicemails. Just the occasional email to my professional address, formal and cautious, from a family learning that access to me required showing up in ways they'd never practiced. I didn't hate them. That surprised me sometimes, late at night when I thought about it. But hate required energy I'd redirected into building something they couldn't touch or diminish. Sylvia had spent 28 years making herself small enough to fit into spaces that were never designed for her. She'd rationalized neglect, forgiven absences, carried hope like a stone in her pocket. Vivian didn't carry stones. She built foundations. She showed up for herself. She surrounded herself with people who understood that presence was the price of admission to someone's life. And if my family wanted to know Dr. Vivian Lane, really know her, not the version they'd overlooked, they would have to earn that privilege. One showed-up moment at a time. If you've ever sat in an empty auditorium, scanned a crowd for faces that never came, rationalized absence as anything but choice. I want you to know that being overlooked doesn't make you insignificant. It makes the people who overlooked you blind. Your quiet achievements matter. Your unwitnessed victories count. Build the life anyway. Show up for yourself when no one else does. And if leaving is what survival requires, leave with purpose, not apology. Change your name if you need to. Change your city. Change every detail that kept you small. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. If any part of it felt familiar, you're not alone. If you'd like to hear more real family stories like this one, you can subscribe to the channel. And if this story brought up something personal for you, feel free to share it in the comments. I do read them. Thanks for listening.